General Elias Titus leaned against the steel railing of the command deck, his sharp eyes fixed on the holographic display of the contested system. His face was weathered, a roadmap of scars earned in wars humanity had long since forgotten, yet his gaze burned with the fire of unyielding resolve. The room buzzed with quiet intensity, every officer around him fully aware of the stakes. This wasn't just a battle for a planet. It was a battle for survival. Captain Carlos Paul, Titus's second-in-command, stepped forward, his boots clicking against the metal floor. A younger man, but no less hardened. Paul carried himself with a quiet confidence that belied the storm of intensity beneath. He adjusted his combat vest and gestured at the hologram. "The Empire's forward base is here, sir," Paul said, his voice steady, every syllable clipped with military precision. "Their supply chain is exposed and their command structure is spread too thin. They're arrogant, sir. They think we're incapable of fighting back." Titus allowed himself a small, grim smile. Arrogance has always been their weakness. They think their fleets and firepower make them invincible. They've never faced anyone like us. His hand tightened on the railing. They don't understand what it means to fight men who've had to claw for every inch of ground, every ounce of freedom. Across the galaxy, the Empire had sent its emissaries, its fleets, its soldiers. On countless worlds, its word was law. To them, humanity was simply another species to subjugate. But the first contact hadn't gone as the Empire expected. When they descended upon Kepler for 52b, a lush, Earth-like world humanity had begun colonizing, they were met not with capitulation, but with a ferocity they hadn't anticipated. That ferocity had a name: the 75th Ranger Regiment. The Rangers were a myth to most of humanity. The stories of their exploits, classified missions deep behind enemy lines, impossible victories against overwhelming odds, were whispered among the ranks of lesser soldiers and immortalized in folklore. For those who wore the Ranger tab, failure wasn't an option. It wasn't even a consideration. The first strike had been surgical and devastating. In the dead of night, a squad of Rangers infiltrated the Empire's forward operating base on Kepler for 52b. Their target, the Empire's planetary defense grid. Paul himself had led the operation, his team moving through the dense jungle like wraiths, their movements precise and unrelenting. By the time the Empire realized they were under attack, it was too late. Explosions lit the sky, and the base was reduced to smoldering ruins. The Empire's response was swift and brutal. Reinforcements poured into the sector, entire battalions dedicated to crushing this upstart species. But humanity didn't fight on their terms. They didn't line up for battle or engage in grand, sweeping campaigns. They fought like wolves, unseen, relentless, and lethal. Now, as the situation escalated, the Empire had done something it had never done in its history of conquest. It asked for negotiations. Negotiations, Paul muttered as he turned to Titus, disbelief etched across his face. They burn our colonies, enslave entire species, and now they want to talk. Titus didn't look away from the hologram. It's desperation. They've underestimated us at every turn, and they're paying the price. Their losses are mounting, and they're afraid. But don't mistake this for weakness. The Empire doesn't bend easily. The thought hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The Rangers had inflicted damage, yes, but this wasn't a war humanity could afford to drag out. The Empire's resources were vast, its fleets endless. Humanity, even united, couldn't match their numbers. If the Rangers faltered, if they hesitated for even a moment, the Empire would seize the advantage and snuff them out. Sergeant Marcus Grizzly Rogers entered the room, his massive frame dwarfing everyone else. A veteran of countless campaigns, Rogers was the kind of soldier you wanted at your side in a fight. Unshakable, resourceful, and utterly lethal. He carried a data pad in one hand, a cigar clamped between his teeth. "Intel just came in, sir," Rogers said, his voice a low rumble. "Empire's deploying more forces to the sector, but they're holding back their main fleet. Looks like they're waiting to see how these negotiations play out. Titus raised an eyebrow. So they're buying time? Looks that way, Roger said. But I don't think they realize how little time they've got. The room fell silent as Titus straightened, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he seemed to weigh the situation, calculating every possible outcome. Then he turned to Paul, his voice low and firm. "What's your assessment, Captain?" Paul didn't hesitate. "They'll use the talks to stall us, regroup, and strike when we're vulnerable. We can't give them that chance, sir. We need to act before they do." Titus nodded. It was what he'd expected, what he'd known all along. The Empire's request for negotiations wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was a ploy, a desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. And the Rangers weren't about to play into their hands. "They think they can outmaneuver us," Titus said, his voice cold and deliberate. "But they've forgotten one thing. We're not like the species they've conquered before. We don't kneel. We don't beg. We fight." The words hung in the air like a battle cry, a declaration of intent. Around the room, the officers straightened, their resolve hardening. They knew what was coming. They'd known at the moment the Empire's ships entered their system. There would be no peace, no truce. This was a fight to the finish, and the Rangers had already decided the outcome. Paul allowed himself a rare smile. "They begged for negotiations," he said. "Let's give them our answer." Titus turned back to the hologram, his hand hovering over the glowing map of the contested system. In his mind, the plan was already forming, every detail falling into place. The Empire had made its move. Now it was humanity's turn. With a sharp motion, he slammed his hand onto the map, the display shifting to highlight the Empire's forward base. "We strike tonight," he said, "and we don't stop until they know what it means to cross us." The room erupted into motion, officers relaying orders, preparing for the operation that would define the future of the conflict. As the Rangers readied themselves for battle, Titus stood silent, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the window. The Empire thought it could bargain. It thought it could intimidate, but it was about to learn what humanity was truly capable of. A sleek silver ship, adorned with the sigils of the Galactic Empire, cut through the darkness of space, its hull shimmering against the light of Earth's sun. For the first time in recorded history, the Empire's proud insignia bore a white flag beneath it, a symbol of reluctant humility. The ship's arrival had been announced hours earlier, a formal request for diplomacy broadcast across human channels. The emissary aboard represented the Empire's desperate attempt to forestall a conflict spiraling beyond their control. But in the hearts of the Rangers watching from the shadows, it was seen as something else entirely: weakness. Inside the UN's orbital command station, the air was tense, brimming with unspoken hostility. The conference chamber had been arranged with immaculate care, its polished tables separating the delegation of Earth's representatives from the galactic emissary who stood at its center. Ambassador Vornak was a towering figure, his crimson skin and elongated features unmistakably alien. Draped in flowing robes that shimmered with faint luminescence, he exuded a sense of authority, but there was an unease in his expression, a subtle crack in the otherwise unyielding facade of imperial pride. Vornak had been tasked with securing peace, not through intimidation, as was the Empire's tradition, but through compromise, a word that left a bitter taste in his mouth. "Humans," Vornak began, his voice deep and resonant, echoing across the chamber. "I stand before you as a representative of the Galactic Empire, bearer of the Emperor's will. We seek to resolve this conflict before it escalates further. The Emperor himself extends an offer of truce." The room remained silent. Seated at the head of the table was Secretary General Alan Ward, a stern, calculating man who had navigated Earth's fragile alliances through the chaos of first contact. His piercing blue eyes studied Vornak with the scrutiny of a predator assessing prey. Next to him, General Titus and Captain Paul stood silently, their presence a reminder that diplomacy was only one path among many. Titus's arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. while Paul's sharp gaze bore into Vornak like a blade. Vornak continued, unfazed by the silence. The Empire acknowledges your unexpected resilience. Your forces have proven formidable, and the Emperor recognizes the need to avoid further bloodshed. In exchange for your cooperation, we are prepared to withdraw from the contested territories and offer reparations to your people. Paul's lips twitched, but he said nothing. It was a lie, of course. The Empire had no intention of withdrawing. They were buying time, regrouping, repositioning. The Rangers knew this because they'd seen it before. This wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was a tactical delay. The only question was whether humanity's leaders would see it for what it was. Secretary General Ward leaned forward, clasping his hands together. Ambassador Vornak, he said, his tone neutral but edged with steel, you speak of reparations and truce, but let us not forget the context of your arrival. Your fleets invaded our colonies. Your soldiers burned our outposts. Now you ask us to trust that your word is worth more than the ashes you've left behind. Why should we believe anything you say? Vornak's crimson eyes flickered. The Emperor understands your skepticism, Secretary General. But consider the alternative. War between our peoples will result in devastation on a scale you cannot imagine. The Empire does not desire your destruction. We desire order, stability, mutual benefit. Paul glanced at Titus, who remained motionless, his face unreadable. The silence between them spoke volumes. The Rangers had fought too many battles, seen too many atrocities, to be swayed by words like order and stability. They knew what those words meant when spoken by an oppressor. Your desire for order, Ward said, his voice icy, has cost us lives and worlds. Forgive me if I struggle to see the benefit in that. Vornak opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Titus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. You speak of mutual benefit, Ambassador, but let's not pretend this is anything more than desperation. Your forces are losing. Your supply lines are fractured. And now, you're here because you're afraid of what happens if we push harder. The room fell silent again, the weight of Titus's words hanging in the air. Vornak's composure faltered for the briefest moment before he regained control. General Titus, he said, his tone measured, this is not fear. This is pragmatism. We wish to avoid unnecessary loss. Titus's expression hardened. The time to avoid loss was before you set foot on our colonies, before you fired the first shot. Now you're here, hoping we'll forget the blood you've spilled. But let me be clear, Ambassador. Humanity doesn't forget, and we don't forgive. Paul felt a surge of pride at Titus's words, but he knew the politics of the situation were far from settled. The diplomats in the room, the politicians, were still weighing their options, debating whether peace, even a false one, was worth the risk. It was a debate Paul wanted no part of. To him, the path was clear. The Empire had shown its hand, and the Rangers had already decided how to respond. Later, in the Ranger Command Center aboard the station, Paul paced restlessly as Rogers entered, carrying a data pad. You're not going to like this, Rogers said, handing it over. Intel from our scouts. The Empire's moving reinforcements into position. Looks like they're stalling for time. Paul scanned the report, his jaw tightening. So, the negotiations are just a front. Exactly what we expected. Rogers shrugged, his massive shoulders rolling like boulders. Yeah, but the brass upstairs is still considering their offer. They think this might actually lead to peace. Paul slammed the data pad onto the table, his frustration boiling over. Peace? The only thing they understand is force. This is a game to them, and they think we're too naive to see the board. Titus entered the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. Enough, he said, his voice calm but firm. We knew this would happen. The Empire isn't here to make peace. They're here to regroup. And while the politicians argue, we'll make sure they don't get the chance. Paul turned to his commanding officer, his eyes sharp with determination. What's the plan, sirs? Titus looked at him, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. "We send a message they can't ignore. Something loud, something decisive." Rogers chuckled darkly. "Now you're speaking my language." The Rangers began preparations immediately, their focus unwavering. They didn't need debates or deliberation. They had their orders, and they knew what needed to be done. While the Empire pleaded for mercy, the Rangers would deliver humanity's response, not in words but in action. Paul stood at the viewport, watching as the Empire's emissary ship departed, its white flag still fluttering mockingly on his mind. He thought of the colonies burned, the lives lost, the countless species crushed beneath the Empire's heel. He thought of Vornak's empty promises and the politicians debating strategy in their conference chambers. "They think we'll hesitate," Paul muttered to himself. "They think we'll give them time." Behind him, Titus's voice cut through the room. "They're wrong." The jungle was alive with movement, shadows flitting between dense foliage as the 75th Ranger Regiment prepared for the culmination of weeks of relentless planning. The target, the Empire Central Command hub on Kepler 452b, the heart of their operations in the sector. Dubbed Operation Iron Resolve, the mission wasn't just an assault, it was a statement. The Rangers intended to tear the Empire's grip from the planet and show them, in no uncertain terms, that humanity was no prey. Captain Carlos Paul crouched beneath the twisted trunk of a massive tree, the humid air clinging to his skin. His rifle was cradled in his hands, its matte black surface absorbing what little light filtered through the dense canopy. Around him, his team moved with practiced precision, their blackened armor blending seamlessly into the shadows. They were ghosts here, unseen and deadly. Ahead, Sergeant Marcus Grizzly Rogers signaled with 2 fingers, the massive man surprisingly nimble as he knelt by a cluster of alien ferns. His hulking frame made him seem out of place in the underbrush, but there wasn't a soldier alive Paul trusted more. Rogers's sharp eyes scanned the path ahead, his instincts honed through years of combat. "Patrol," Rogers muttered into his comm, his deep voice barely audible over the faint crackle of static. 4 hostiles, 30 meters out." Paul tapped his helmet twice, signaling the rest of the squad. Like a single organism, they melted into the environment, their movements fluid and soundless. Paul's heart pounded in his chest, but his breathing remained steady, each inhale and exhale measured and deliberate. The Rangers thrived on moments like this, when the line between life and death blurred, and every action carried weight. The Empire's soldiers were visible now, their angular armor reflecting faint glimmers of moonlight as they moved in formation. Paul noted their patterns, the lazy confidence in their steps. They believed they owned this jungle, this planet. That belief would cost them. A faint whistle cut through the air, the signal. The Rangers moved as one, a blur of motion and precision. Paul fired first. His rifle's suppressed report barely a whisper as the lead Imperial soldier crumpled to the ground. Rogers followed, his blade flashing as he closed the distance to the second target, the alien's throat opening in a spray of crimson. The remaining 2 barely had time to react before they too were dispatched, their bodies collapsing silently into the underbrush. Paul knelt beside one of the fallen soldiers, examining the alien's gear. "Standard patrol loadout," he murmured into the comm. "They're not expecting a full assault." "Arrogance," Rogers replied, wiping his blade clean on a patch of moss. "It'll be their undoing." The team regrouped and pressed forward, their movements synchronized and purposeful. Every step brought them closer to the command hub, a sprawling complex hidden deep within the jungle. Satellite imagery had shown the base to be heavily fortified, its perimeter lined with automated turrets and energy shields. But the Rangers had studied every detail, identified every weakness. They didn't come here to fail. As they approached the edge of a clearing, Paul raised a fist, signaling a halt. The base was visible now, its angular structures illuminated by harsh floodlights. Empire soldiers patrolled the perimeter, their numbers far greater than the patrol they had just encountered. Paul's mind worked quickly, analyzing the scene, and calculating the best approach. Command hubs got heavy defenses. Paul whispered into the comm Rogers, "Take Bravo team and set charges on the southeast shield generator. We'll create a diversion on the west side to draw their attention." Rogers grinned, a feral gleam in his eyes. "Understood, Captain. Let's light this place up." As Rogers led half the team into the shadows, Paul turned to the remaining Rangers. "We hit them hard and fast. Stick to the plan, and don't give them a chance to regroup. We've got one shot at this." The team nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. They knew the risks, but they also knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about Kepler 452b. It was about sending a message to the Empire, a message written in fire and blood. Paul signaled, and the team moved into position. Moments later, a deafening explosion rocked the southeast side of the base, flames erupting as the shield generator was obliterated. Alarms blared, and chaos erupted as Empire soldiers scrambled to respond. "Move!" Paul barked, leading his team out of the underbrush and into the fray. They struck with the precision of a scalpel, their suppressed rifles picking off targets with unerring accuracy. Empire soldiers fell before they even realized they were under attack, their cries drowned out by the cacophony of alarms and gunfire. Rogers' voice crackled over the comm generators down. "Shields are offline." "Good work," Paul replied. "Keep the pressure on. We're breaching the command center." The team advanced, their progress relentless. Paul felt a surge of adrenaline as they reached the outer walls of the command hub. The structure loomed above them, its metallic surface gleaming ominously. Paul placed a breaching charge on the nearest door, the explosive adhering with a faint hiss. "Fire in the hole," he muttered, stepping back as the charge detonated, the blast echoing through the complex. The door crumpled inward, and the Rangers stormed inside, their rifles sweeping the room. Inside, the base was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, the air thick with the hum of alien machinery. The Rangers moved quickly, their boots pounding against the metallic floors as they cleared each room with ruthless efficiency. Paul's focus was razor-sharp, every sense attuned to the mission. They reached the central command chamber, its walls lined with glowing consoles and holographic displays. The room was empty, save for a single figure, a high-ranking Imperial officer clad in ornate armor, his crimson eyes glaring with a mix of defiance and fear. "You've made a grave mistake," the officer snarled, his voice trembling despite his bravado. "The Empire will not forgive this." Paul leveled his rifle at the alien, his expression cold. "The Empire doesn't forgive? Neither do we." Before the officer could respond, Paul fired, the shot piercing the alien's chest and sending him sprawling to the floor. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the holographic displays. Command center secured. Paul reported into the comm all teams, regroup at the extraction point. The Rangers moved quickly, planting charges throughout the base as they made their way back to the jungle. By the time they reached the extraction point, the base was a smoldering ruin, its once imposing structures reduced to rubble. As the dropship lifted off, Paul glanced out the window, his expression unreadable. The mission had been a success, but he knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would respond, and the war would escalate. But for now, humanity had sent its message. They would not kneel. They would not break. And the Empire would learn to fear the Rangers. The city of New Phoenix gleamed in the evening light, its towers of steel and glass standing tall against the backdrop of an orange sky. It was a symbol of Earth's resilience, a beacon of humanity's capacity to rebuild and endure. But beneath the surface of its bustling streets and vibrant plazas, a quiet tension simmered. The Galactic Empire had been struck where it hurt, and now the question loomed: how long until they struck back? In the dimly lit operations room of the Ranger headquarters, Captain Paul stood before a massive holographic map of the sector. His hands rested on the edges of the console, his posture tense as he reviewed the aftermath of Operation Iron Resolve. The base on Kepler 452b had been reduced to ash, and the Rangers had made it out with minimal losses. But the operation's success had stirred the Empire like a hornet's nest. Reports of fleet movements and troop deployments were already coming in, painting a grim picture of what was to come. General Titus entered the room, his footsteps heavy against the metal floor. He stopped beside Paul, his stern gaze fixed on the glowing map. "The Emperor's not going to take this lying down," Titus said, his voice low. "We've bloodied his nose, but now he's going to come at us with everything he's got." Paul straightened, his jaw tightening. "Let him," he said, his voice hard. "We've shown the Empire what we're capable of. They'll think twice before underestimating us again." Titus gave a faint nod, but didn't respond immediately. He studied the younger man, seeing the weight of the conflict etched into Paul's features. "You did well out there," Titus finally said. "You and your team. The operation was a success, but the real fight is just beginning." Paul's eyes didn't leave the map. "We knew this was coming. The Empire's too proud to back down, even when it's in their best interest. But we'll be ready. The Rangers are always ready. Even Rangers have limits," Titus said quietly. "Don't forget that." The words hung in the air for a moment before the sound of the door opening drew their attention. Rogers stepped into the room, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He held a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a data pad in the other. "Thought you two might need this," he said, handing the coffee to Paul and setting the pad on the console. Paul took a sip, the bitter liquid doing little to ease the tightness in his chest. "What's the latest?" he asked, gesturing to the pad. "Empire's massing forces in the Rigel system," Rogers said, his voice grim. "Looks like they're planning to hit back hard. Intel suggests they're targeting one of our forward colonies, probably Haven 4. Titus swore under his breath. Haven 4 was a critical outpost, its location strategic for both supply lines and planetary defenses. Losing it would be a devastating blow. "They're trying to draw us out," Paul said, his mind racing. "They want us to commit our forces to a defensive stand, so they can hit us somewhere else while we're tied up." "Exactly," Rogers said. "It's a trap, plain and simple." Titus rubbed his temple, the strain of command evident in his expression. "We can't ignore it. If they take Haven 4, they'll have a foothold to push deeper into our territory." Paul set his coffee down and turned to face Titus. "Then we don't give them the chance. We take the fight to them before they can make their move, hit their staging ground in the Rigel system, and throw them off balance." Rogers raised an eyebrow. "Bold move, Captain. But you're assuming we can get the jump on them. The Empire's not exactly known for leaving their flanks exposed, which is why we'll need to be surgical," Paul said. "Another operation, just like Kepler 452b. Fast, decisive, and unexpected." Titus considered the proposal, his gaze piercing as he weighed the risks and rewards. "You're asking for a lot, Paul. Another op like this could stretch our resources thin. And if we fail—" "We won't fail," Paul interrupted, his voice firm. "We can't afford to." The room fell silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Finally, Titus nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. "All right, start drawing up the plans. But make no mistake, this is a gamble, and if it goes wrong, it's on you." Paul inclined his head, accepting the responsibility without hesitation. "Understood, sir." As Titus left the room, Rogers crossed his arms and leaned against the console, his expression contemplative. "You really think we can pull this off?" he asked. Paul met his gaze, his eyes steady. "I don't think, Rogers. I know. The Empire thinks they can intimidate us into submission, but they're wrong. This isn't just about survival. It's about proving we belong here, that we're not just another species for them to conquer." Rogers's lips curved into a faint smile. "Damn right." The conversation was interrupted by a chime from the console. A message from Earth Command flashed across the screen, its contents marked as classified. Paul opened it, his expression hardening as he read. "What is it?" Rogers asked, his tone wary. "Orders from Command," Paul said, his voice clipped. They want us to stand down and focus on defensive preparations. No offensive actions without direct authorization. Rogers let out a low whistle. They're playing it safe. Can't say I blame them, but this isn't the time to hold back. Paul's fists clenched at his sides. He understood the logic. Earth couldn't afford unnecessary risks. But playing it safe wouldn't win this war. The Empire had to be met with force, and hesitation would only give them the advantage. They don't see the bigger picture, Paul said, his voice low but fierce. This isn't just about defending what we have. It's about taking the fight to them and showing the galaxy that humanity won't be pushed around. Rogers studied him for a moment before nodding. So, what's the plan, Captain? Paul's eyes gleamed with resolve. We follow orders for now, but if the opportunity presents itself, we'll act. We're Rangers, Rogers. We adapt, we improvise, and we don't wait for permission to do what needs to be done. Rogers chuckled, the sound deep and resonant. Now that's the Paul the First no. As the two men returned to their preparations, the holographic map shifted, displaying new intelligence reports and potential strategies. The Empire's shadow loomed large, but the Rangers weren't afraid. They were a force forged in fire, and they would meet the coming storm head-on. Outside the headquarters, the city of New Phoenix continued to thrive, its people oblivious to the war being waged in the shadows. But Paul knew that peace was fragile, a fleeting moment between battles. And as he gazed at the glowing map, he made a silent vow. No matter the cost, humanity would endure, and the Empire would learn, one battle at a time, that Earth was no longer a backwater planet on the edge of the galaxy. It was a force to be reckoned with, and the Rangers would ensure the galaxy never forgot it.